Hi, happy Monday. Did you turn those clocks back? Welcome to Stand Up. I've got an amazing guest joining me. Really great conversation with a lot of, like a human highlight reel of brilliance. Andrew Seidel joins me today to talk about the threat of Christian nationalism, especially now that we have a new Speaker of the House, which you'll later find out, shared a very weird Christian accountability app with his son that helped monitor each other's porn intake. It's the craziest thing you'll ever hear. I'll play that for you coming up. My interview with Andrew starts at about 30 minutes. I did a whole bunch of news and clips because it's Monday and a lot happened over the weekend. Also, I hope you saw over the weekend I dropped 2 episodes of the show, 2 great conversations with Christian Finnegan and Dr. Michael Mann, the climate scientist. We talked about his new book, Our Fragile Moment. A lot of good feedback on both of those conversations. If you haven't heard them, feel free to go back and listen to them. And by the way, thank you to those of you who gave me a nice birthday gift. Last week was my birthday, and someone suggested I put out my Venmo if anybody wanted to give a bonus for the podcast gift. And several of you did, and I really appreciate that. Thank you very much for your kindness, generosity, and support. I cannot do the show without you. This is independent media where each and every day we try to learn about what is happening in the world, get enlightened and informed on the important issues that are happening in our communities, our country, our planet, and of course, even in us. So let's get after it, shall we? The new format of the show, at least for this week and moving forward in the near future, it's the introduction, the headlines, news, and notes. Then I'll play some sound clips for you and do, of course, the interview, which is basically how it's always worked, but I'm organizing it, refining it just a little bit more. Love your feedback. As always, send it over to standupwithpete@gmail.com. Let's start with those headlines. Bit of a news dump from the weekend, starting with what's happening in the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Middle East. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, he made an unannounced visit to the West Bank. He met with the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas. Thousands of demonstrators in Tel Aviv called on the Israeli government to do more to rescue hostages in Gaza. Pro-Palestinian protests all over the world this weekend, including Washington, D.C. Some pretty horrific rhetoric being heard at some of those marches. Israel used at least 2 2,000-pound bombs, the second largest in its arsenal, in its airstrikes in Jabalia, am I saying that right, according to experts and the New York Times analysis. A Biden administration official accused Hamas of delaying efforts to get foreign nationals out of Gaza by trying to put its wounded fighters on departure lists. A 30-year-old Jewish woman was stabbed twice in her home in Lyon, France on Saturday. Police found a swastika drawn on her door. Her condition is serious but not life-threatening. Suspect still at large. The president of Turkey, Erdogan, has cut ties with Bibi Netanyahu. And those are the headlines around that conflict and the region. Back here in the U.S., the Actors Union said it's reviewing a final offer by Hollywood studios to resolve a months-long strike. Workers in San Francisco have almost finished installing more than 3 miles of steel netting along the Golden Gate Bridge as a suicide deterrent system. And astronaut Ken Mattingly, best remembered for his efforts on the ground to help bring the damaged Apollo 13 spacecraft back to Earth, has died. According to NASA, he was 87 years old. Over the weekend, of course, the New York City Marathon, beautiful day in the Northeast for that. And this week, President Trump expected to testify tomorrow, actually, today, I should say. I'm pretending like it's Monday. It's actually Sunday night when I record this. In his civil fraud case against him. China and the U.S. finished their weekend climate talks today, and state and U.S. elections are this Tuesday. I'm heavily involved in our local Democratic Party and thinking a lot about that this week. A lot of work in this campaign locally, and hopefully we win as many seats as we can this week. I know a lot of people are hopefully involved in their local races, a lot of eyes on what's going on in Virginia, and I think that is all I've got for the headlines. Let's get to some sound, shall we? President Obama sits down this week with his Pod Saves America old colleagues, those guys that used to work for him and have been riding on his coattails with their amazingly popular podcast. He sat down with them and they talked about Israel-Hamas war. And I thought this was interesting. 3 minutes from the former president on this very complex and controversial situation. It's been really hard for a lot of everybody to talk about, I should say. Here is President Obama kind of playing all sides of it and explaining why it's complicated on Pod Saves America.
If there's any chance of us being able to act constructively to do something, it will require an admission of complexity and maintaining what on the surface may seem contradictory ideas. That what Hamas did was horrific and there's no justification for it. And what is also true is that the occupation and what's happening to Palestinians is unbearable. And what is also true is that there is a history of the Jewish people that may be dismissed unless your grandparents or your great-grandparents or your uncle or your aunt tell you stories about the madness of anti-Semitism. And what is true is that there are people right now who are dying who have nothing to do with what Hamas did. And what is true, right? I mean, we can go on for a while. And the problem with the social media and trying to TikTok activism and trying to debate this on that is you can't speak the truth. You can pretend to speak the truth. You can speak one side of the truth. And in some cases, you can try to maintain your moral innocence, but that won't solve the problem. And so if you want to solve the problem, then you have to take in the whole truth. And you then have to admit nobody's hands are clean, that all of us are complicit to some degree. I look at this and I think back, what could I have done during my presidency to move this forward as hard as I tried? I've got the scars to prove it. But there's a part of me that's still saying, well, was there something else I could have done? That's the conversation we should be having. Not just looking backwards, but looking forward. And that can't happen if we are confining ourselves to our outrage. I would rather see you out there talking to people, including people who you disagree with. If you genuinely want to change this, then you've got to figure out how to speak to somebody on the other side and listen to them and understand what they are talking about and not dismiss it. Because you can't save that child without their help. Not in this situation.
All right. Well, I guess you can listen to that whole thing this week. There you go. That's the president talking on Pod Saves America. I wanted to share that with you. Also, a lot of people I know are concerned or scared about President Biden, chances for re-election next year, and this terrible polling that has been coming out for him. Voters in battleground states now saying they're trusting Donald Trump over President Biden on the economy, foreign policy, and immigration in a new New York Times Siena College poll, and everybody's flipping out about it yesterday. So let's go to one of the best polling political analysts out there, Larry Sabato, University of Virginia. He was on CNN yesterday and said, don't worry about it. It's way too early. This is ridiculous.
So what's your take? Yeah, what's your take on these poll numbers? And do you believe that the White House should be making any adjustments as a result of what these poll numbers are?
Well, I'm sure the White House in any campaign would make adjustments constantly with a year to go, but not big adjustments. They've got a plan. They should stick to it. I think that's what they're doing. Look, as they pointed out correctly, the election for president is a year away exactly. how many dozens of major events and circumstances and new things that we didn't think of in advance will happen between now and the actual election. Just think about what's happened in prior elections, and you'll realize how much is yet to come. And incumbent presidents often are behind at this point in their third year before they actually get into the fourth year. But look, the numbers in the New York Times Siena poll, I wouldn't argue with too many of them. They were close, and I think that's reasonable, except for Nevada, which was ridiculous. You're not going to have a 11-point Trump landslide in Nevada. It's a very, very close state. But there's no need for panic, as you mentioned. If you looked on X, what we used to call Twitter, I don't know how many people had heart attacks this morning, and it's just totally unnecessary. You've got a choice if you're a Democrat. You can spend your energy being worried and upset and getting an ulcer, or you can use that energy to go out and change things.
All right, there you go. Yes, exactly. Well said, Larry Sabato. I appreciated that. Wanted to share that one with you. Now here is Democratic Congressman Jason Crow on CBS's Face the Nation. I heard this and wanted to share it with you because I've been saying this, I believe this, and I think he nails it. He's a veteran who has fought in Afghanistan and Iraq, I believe, and this is what he had to say about the potential for Israel's overreaction in Gaza, what it could do, what it means, based on his own experience fighting terrorists.
I fought 3 times in Iraq and Afghanistan. This nation spent 20 years at war, spent over $3 trillion to destroy al-Qaeda, to destroy ISIS, and yet those organizations still exist. So the lesson drawn from that is that you cannot destroy a terrorist ideology with military means alone. You have to have politics, you have to have diplomacy, you have to have humanitarian aid, because you can kill a terrorist, but if you destroy or kill innocent civilians, you create more terrorists in the process. So that is why I am adamant that to support Israel, to do this the right way, we have to put front and center the protection of civilians. And every time the United States makes a mistake or strays from our path, I call it out, because the path to getting better and improving is being honest.
But this is often framed as either for or against terrorists. You're saying, no, you can prosecute a war on terrorism without causing mass civilian casualties.
Well, I spent years in my earlier career fighting terrorists, literally fighting terrorists, and seeing some of my friends give everything during that process. I am a very ardent national security Democrat. I know that there is no military solution to these issues alone. And because I want success, because I want us to do better and to learn from our mistakes, we have to be honest when we do make those mistakes and when our partners make those mistakes.
All right. I thought that was very, very accurate, articulate, and credible from Congressman Jason Crow. And now let's get to someone who isn't. It's Congressman Steve Scalise from Louisiana, who has failed in his nomination, his quest to be the speaker. Well, he was on ABC this week with George Stephanopoulos, who asked him, I think, 6 times if he thought that the election of 2020 was stolen. I edited out much of his responses in this clip because he goes on, but here's the edited version of George Stephanopoulos trying to get him to answer a simple and important question. And my only comment about this is when people say you want to relive the election, their nominee, most likely, former disgraced President Donald Trump, will not stop talking about the election being stolen. And this isn't about reliving something. This is potentially one of the most consequential policy issues. Are our elections secure? And since that day, election day 2020, and the months after, Republicans have been telling a big lie, deteriorating people's trust in our very secure elections. And that's why it's so important. Here it is.
Can you say unequivocally that the 2020 election was not stolen?
What I've told you is there are states that didn't follow their laws. That is what the state constitution, the U.S. Constitution requires. I've seen in my own state where we had to send our elections commissioner to jail years ago for fraud and corruption, and we cleaned up our act in our state. Every state ought to follow the laws that are on their books. That's what the U.S. Constitution says.
That's not what I asked. I said, can you say unequivocally that the 2020 election was not stolen?
Look, Joe Biden's president. I know you and others want to talk about 2020. We're focused on the future. We've talked about 2020 a lot. We're talking about That's what we're focusing on in the House.
I know that Joe Biden is president. I'm asking you a different question. Can you say unequivocally that the 2020 election was not stolen?
What I've told you, and you've seen this, there are states that didn't follow the laws that are on their books, which is what the U.S. Constitution says they have to do.
So you just refuse to say unequivocally that the 2020 election was not stolen?
So you want to keep rehashing 2020? We're talking.
I just want an answer to the question, yes or no.
Threats to this country. We've talked about this before, but again, will you acknowledge that there were states that didn't follow the actual state legislative enacted laws on their books, which the U.S. Constitution says they're supposed to do?
I know that every court that looked at whether the election was stolen said it wasn't, rejected those claims. And I asked you a very, very simple question. Now I've asked it, I think, the fifth time that you can't appear to answer. Can you say unequivocally that the 2020 election was not stolen?
I told you there were a handful of states that didn't follow their laws. The rest did. The rest followed. And again, states that Trump won, states that Biden won that did follow their laws. There were a handful of states that didn't follow the laws that were on the books. They went to secretaries of state to change the rules of the game. And then the voters didn't know what the rules were because ultimately the state laws weren't followed in those states. That's not what the U.S. Constitution says. At some point, we should go back to following the Constitution, George.
The courts have all followed the Constitution. They all rejected the claims you just made. And I just want to say again, for the record.
Or they said there was no standing.
You cannot say that the 2020 election was not stolen. Yes or no, was the 2020 election stolen?
What I've told you is Joe Biden's the president of the United States, and right now he's failing the country on so many fronts that matter to families. We're talking about...
Oh, who cares? Here's how it ended with George Stephanopoulos just saying this.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks for your time. All right, well, that was really crazy, and I thought important that George Stephanopoulos handled it just that way. And now a whole bunch of the Republican candidates for president went to some weird conference with a lot of weird religious people in Florida. It was the Florida Freedom Summit, and Chris Christie got so heckled, but I want to play this clip, and then I will trigger alert, play a quick clip of Donald Trump responding to Chris Christie.
Yeah. Well, now it feels like home. Thank you all very much. Let me first thank the chairman and everyone here. Yep. Look. What a shock. You're for Trump. I'm going to fall over dead. Now look. Every one of those boos, every one of those catcalls, every one of those yells will not keep it. Yes, sure. Will not solve one problem we face in this country. Will not solve, and will not make this country better. Your anger against the truth is reprehensible. When you think about the problems that our country and this world is facing, when you think about that, this type of pettiness is beneath the process of electing a president. Yeah. And as people watch today, if your arguments are so strong, if your arguments are so great, and mine are so bad, then just keep quiet. Let me make my awful arguments, and then you can just reject them out of hand. But the problem is you fear the truth.
Oh, man, tough stuff, but he plowed right through it. I'm not sure he won anyone over there in the room, much less anywhere else, but I'm real happy that Chris Christie is out there doing what he's doing. I don't care what he's done in the past. But then the former disgraced president went up there and had this to say, which is just crazy. And by the way, I'm pretty sure no one yelled out that Chris Christie was a fat pig, right? Don't you think he just made that up? Was there any reporters in the room that heard someone actually yell that out, or does he just make that up and do this bit?
No, I heard they virtually booed him off the stage. Because, you know, what's it all about? He's just doing it because I didn't give him a job in the administration. What's he doing? And why would I do a debate when Christie, sir, I'm sorry, he is not a fat pig, okay, this man? You said, he is not a fat pig. No, it's true. And you can't use the term fat. You're allowed to use the word pig, but not fat. No, the man just said, he's a fat pig. And I said, no, he's not a fat pig. So now the press can't kill me because all I'm doing is responding. I'm responding. He is not a fat pig.
All right. Well, we're almost to my conversation with Andrew Seidel, who I'm going to talk a lot about Mike Johnson with. And since between the time I talked to him just a day ago or so and posting this, more has come out about Speaker Mike Johnson, including this video that was recently unearthed of the now House Speaker promoting an app called Covenant Eyes, which tracks all activity on cell phones and other devices and sends a weekly report to a so-called accountability partner. So just in case you're watching porn or looking at unsavory images. But what's super weird is that his accountability partner was his son. What the? Listen to this.
With Covenant Eyes within your home. And so why is that such an effective tool? Why do parents need to put this into their home?
Yeah, that's great. Great question. We probably could have called this more appropriately a war on the darkness of technology, because there are some good things with technology, of course. I mean, you know, the Bible apps we all love, we broadcast our services, you know, on our social media, and there's some very positive things, but there's also, as Clint's pointed out aptly, some really dark things. So Covenant Eyes is the software that we've been using a long time in our household. I first learned about it at, I think, a Promise Keepers event in the early 2000s. I think it was developed in about the year 2000. But it's the largest accountability software that there is, and there's some paperwork out there on the table that I think everybody may have picked up on the way in. If not, go get it. It's a subscription-based. I mean, we don't make any money on this. I'm telling you, we use it. Okay, I'm endorsing it because I'm a user. It's about $15 a month, $16 a month, something like that. And you get up to 10 devices. And what it is, it's accountability software. So men in a church, you know, men's Bible study groups will do it. That's how it's presented at Promise Keepers. But they also mention, hey, when your kids become teenagers, especially if you have boys, dads, they're talking to the guys at this event, you might want to think about doing this with your sons. And so we've been doing that. And so what it does real simply is it has an algorithm and software. It's way above my head how it works, but it scans. You obviously opt into it, but it scans all the activity on your phone or your devices, your laptop, tablet, what have you. We do all of it. And then it sends a report to your accountability partner. So my accountability partner right now is Jack, my son, right? And so he's 17. So he and I get a report of all the things that are on our phones or all of our devices once a week. If anything objectionable comes up, your accountability partner gets an immediate notice. I'm proud to tell you my son he's got a clean slate, all right? Yeah. But we get a report and it says, hey, no activity of concern, and it's really, really sensitive. It'll pick up almost anything. It looks for keywords, search terms, and also images, and it will send your accountability partner a blurred picture of the image. And so on occasion I get one. I was just looking at the one from this week I got on Jack, and it said, This is the only one that may be questionable, and it's this blurred image of two women talking in a live screen thing, and I zoom in and I have to unblur it, and it's two middle-aged teachers.
What is he talking about? I don't know. That's where the clip ends, but that shit is crazy. Really, really weird, and I very much hope he gets asked about that. He was asked on Fox News about a couple of things that have come up, including the fact that he doesn't have a checking account. Listen to his answer to that.
No, but I have to ask you this because there's been so much made about it. Vanity Fair says this. What's up with Mike Johnson's very shady-seeming financial disclosures? They say you've never reported a bank account or an asset on a financial disclosure form going back to 2016. Can you clear that up for us?
Yes, look, I'm a man of modest means, okay? I was a lawyer, but I did constitutional law, and most of my career I spent in the nonprofit sector. We have 4 kids, 5 now, that are very active, and I have kids in graduate school, law school, undergraduate. We have a lot of expenses, but I can relate to everybody else. My father was a firefighter, right? I didn't grow up with great means, but I think that helps us be a better leader because we can relate to every hardworking American family. That's who we are, and I think it governs and helps govern my decisions and how I lead. Well,
a majority of Americans now say they're living paycheck to paycheck, so a lot of folks in the same boat as they try to figure out this economy. Yeah. Speaker,
what is she talking about? She thinks that these Americans that are living paycheck to paycheck are in the same boat as him, or that he's in the same boat as them. What on earth? All right, well, there's more, because listen to her ask him about his views and votes on contraception.
I want to talk about some social issues. You've got a lot of critics who say that you are wildly out of step with the American people. Let's talk abortion first. One of the groups opposing you says this: he wants a total abortion ban with no exceptions. He supported bans that would not only criminalize abortion, but ban IVF treatments and common forms of birth control, and that you voted against access to contraception. Where are you on these issues? Is that an accurate assessment of where you are? Because that's not in step with the American people.
No, Shannon, look, I'm pro-life. I've said very clearly I'm a Bible-believing Christian. I believe in the sanctity of every single human life. So I come to Congress with deep, personally held convictions. But guess what? So do my 434 other colleagues in the House. Everyone comes to Congress with their deeply held convictions. But the process here is that you make law by consensus. And I've not brought forward any measure to address any of those issues. Right now, our priorities are funding the government, handling these massive national security priorities that we have in crises around the globe, and taking care of changing and reforming how Congress works. That's what we're going to do. Listen, prior to the modern time, I mean, until recently, actually, almost all of our nation's leaders openly acknowledged that they were also Bible-believing Christians. I mean, this is not something that should cause great unrest, okay? It's just that Washington right now, what you're seeing, Washington and the Associated Press Corps are engaging with a leader who openly acknowledges faith and the foundational principles of our country. Okay, I think this is a healthy discussion, but it doesn't affect how we run Congress.
To be clear, though, have you voted against fertility treatments and access to contraception? Would you?
I don't think so. I'm not sure what they're talking about. I really don't remember any of those measures.
But do you oppose anything?
I am personally pro-life, yeah. No, of course not. That's something that's blessed a lot of families who have problems with fertility. Of course, that's a great thing. I would support that. But look, again, these are not issues that are on the front of the agenda, and we can come with our convictions, and we can govern in an accountable, transparent manner for the American people, and that's what we're going to do.
Okay, well, if she was better at her job, she would have said that she would have followed up with the accusations from Emily's list and seen, as I did, that he voted against the Right to Contraception Act, which would protect access to birth control, which was passed in the House in July 2022. Additionally, co-sponsored the Defund Planned Parenthood Act, which would restrict federal funding for Planned Parenthood, its affiliates, or clinics for a year, which also would restrict contraception, because that's way more of what they do than abortion. But as a result of all this, I think we need some laughs. I hope you don't mind me playing some Bill Maher. I mean, it's from the monologue. I thought these jokes were funny. I know a lot of people don't like Bill Maher, but I like this, and I want to play it before we get to my interview with Andrew Seidel.
But yes, it's also the time of year where we set our clocks back this week. Yeah. And after electing Mike Johnson as Speaker, this is twice in 1 week for the Republicans. Have you seen this guy? Ooh, I mean, there's Christy and then there's Christy. This Mike Johnson guy. And listen to this. This is just weird out of left field. We found out about him this week because we don't know this guy. Has no bank account. I'm not making it up. They cannot find any trade. No bank account, no savings account, no stuff. What is he, a pimp? Who in this? What is he? That's what we need. A Speaker of the House who's off the grid. That gives me a lot of confidence. So the first thing he wants to do is, we voted all this money to beef up the IRS, which we need because of a lot of tax cheats. He wants to take some of that money away, $14 billion, take that away, which they did the score, and they found it actually adds to the debt. So, you see, Mike, this is what happens when you use only Christian accountants.
All right, well, I certainly don't like a lot of what Bill Maher does these days, and really wish that show or he wasn't still hosting it, but his writers came up with some good jokes, and he is a good performer, a good stand-up at performing them, so hopefully nobody cancels me for playing it. I thought it was worth it, and it's part of the new format. I want to try to, especially after we're playing all that serious stuff, have some comedy in here whenever possible. But now it's time to get to my conversation with Andrew Seidel, who I think you are really going to like. He was on the program for the first time back in July, episode 883. He's the author of 2 books, The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism Is Un-American, and American Crusade, How the Supreme Court is Weaponizing Religious Freedom. He's also the co-editor of an academic text called Law and Religion, Cases and Materials. Also conceived of and organized the groundbreaking Christian Nationalism at the January 6, 2021 Insurrection report that was published by the Baptist Joint Committee. And I really, really like this guy. I think he's super smart. Thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I hope you will too. Go follow him, support him on social media. You can support him on Patreon. All those links in today's show notes, as they are for every guest every day. Let's do it right now with Andrew Seidel.
There he is, Andrew Seidel. I just checked, your TikTok numbers are huge. You're crushing it over there.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's a fun place. It's all my dancing. That's what really does it over there.
Yeah, no, you do. You're covering a lot of ground. It's good to see you. I re-listened to our conversation back in early July. It was really good. Really good. I hope people go back and check that one out to learn a little bit more about you and your work. But of course, when I saw this new speaker, Mike Johnson, get elected, I thought right of you. Tell us about your first book.
Yeah, I mean, my first book is called The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism Is Un-American. And it goes over all of the myths and disinformation that make up the Christian nationalist identity. So things that you heard Mike Johnson say in his acceptance speech, for instance, right? That the Declaration of Independence references the Christian God 4 different times, that our entire society is based on the idea that people are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. All of these things that he kind of regurgitated, that he has built his life and career around, really. The idea that we are founded as a Christian nation and based on Judeo-Christian principles, that's what I tackle in my first book, The Founding Myth. So everything he has been saying, and he himself, has been very familiar to me. I've been aware of Mike Johnson for more than a decade and had to tangle with him, unfortunately, on a few occasions. So, yeah, sad to see him second in line of succession for the presidency. It's deeply alarming here.
So you were familiar with his work before he got the nod. Man, when you saw did you ever... I don't think anybody really thought of him as a potential speaker. His name was not being submitted anywhere that I heard in, congressional reporters that cover this granular development. But
yeah, it really wasn't until the day before. And as soon as I saw it floated, I mean, the whole vista of the future opened up in front of me. And I immediately was, I was on TikTok. I was everywhere saying, warning, warning, warning. This guy is a true dyed-in-the-wool, zealous Christian nationalist, right? He has dedicated his entire career to advancing Christian nationalism. He has worked with some of the most hateful Christian nationalist groups out there, groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom. He was an attorney for them for a long time. Also with the First Liberty Institute, which is the group that took the case about the football coach that was imposing his prayer on other people's kids, if people remember that case. The Family Research Council. Right? I mean, this is a guy who says that America is a Christian nation. He wants to ban marriage between same-sex couples, ban homosexual relationships, ban abortion nationwide. He thinks the state should tax citizens to fund Christian ministries like Ken Ham's Ark Park in Kentucky. It argues that dinosaurs were on Noah's Ark and that the earth is 6,000 years old.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as concerned about that belief as I am about his thoughts on sodomy, which directly affect me. I keep working that joke in. But I mean,
well, but I mean, I think there's an interesting tie that people don't realize with the creationism, because a lot of the things that you've heard him say, for instance, if you've heard some of his quotes around mass shootings, right, he is pulling rhetoric about blaming mass shootings effectively on the teaching of evolution in our public schools, right? You hear him talk about primordial slime, and we teach kids that it's just survival of the fittest, right? He is pulling that language and basing his public policy about gun violence and gun control on that kind of creationist worldview.
Well, I shouldn't have said that. I was literally, clearly, listeners know I was crowbarring my ass play.
You just watch your ass joke.
Yeah, because the truth is, the Ark Park thing and the belief that dinosaurs walk the earth with humans, all that is actually the worst belief, the most dangerous and pernicious and arguably existential belief, because it ties directly into the denial around the planet. I'm going to talk to Dr. Michael Mann later today, climate scientist. It's people who believe that do not believe in the science around the climate crisis. And so what do you have to say? What about that? I know you obviously started as an environmental lawyer.
Yeah, I mean, this actually goes back to the Reagan administration, right? You have James Watt, who's the Secretary of the Interior in the Reagan administration, who argues that the environment was given by God to humans for their dominion, and that therefore we don't need to worry about damaging it because Jesus is coming back soon. And he was one of the first sort of cabinet level officials to say these things out loud, but it continues. Right? There was Representative Shimkus from Illinois who a number of years ago was running one of the House subcommittees on science. And he gets up there and says, look, we don't have to worry about climate change. God promised Noah that he would never flood the earth again.
Yeah.
This happened actually just a couple weeks ago in Pennsylvania. There was a state rep there, Stephanie Borowitz, who said something like that. If she quotes Genesis 8, as long as the earth endures, that kind of language to suggest that we don't have to worry about the climate crisis because of fables from the Bible. I mean, this is really, really dangerous. And it is absolutely Christian nationalism. And I mean, Mike Johnson's just, it continues to spiral like that. He and his wife believe in conversion therapy. They think there's a war on Christmas. They believe that the Bible forms the basis of our Constitution. All of these things are just, they're so far out there.
Let's just do a little bit on the conversion therapy and just gay rights and equality and all that, because I just heard this new audio of him. I mean, I guess we're going to find every day now. You're going to have all these reporters digging, or just regular people. It's not hard to find. The guy had his own podcast. He's been everywhere. He's talked everywhere. And on the issue of gay rights, gay marriage has been legal for how many years now? Is it 2012? I think. And I mean, that ship has to some extent sailed, I think. You get rights. It's very hard to remove rights, and people aren't going to give them up very easily. And yet I just heard audio of him from several years ago. I don't think it matters, saying like homosexuality, because they refuse to say gay because they know that that's, I guess that's workshopped pretty well, that focus grouped. It's a choice. And it's like, are we going to do that again? And by the way, if it is, he's saying it's a choice not to be gay. But the point is, it's like, why? Why would you make it? Being gay is pretty awesome, according to a lot of people I know.
It's 2015 was the Obergefell case. It was when the Supreme Court declared marriage equality was the law of the land. But I mean, Johnson's career, I mean, this has really been a focus, a sort of a preoccupation, maybe an obsession might be a good word, with what goes on in the bedroom of two consenting adults who happen to be of the same sex. To tie it back to creationism, Answers in Genesis is the name of the organization that runs the Ark Park and the Creation Museum in Kentucky. He is writing articles for that creationist magazine, Answers in Genesis, after the Obergefell ruling.
Wow.
And he's said, here's one of the quotes: despite the radical secularists' efforts to convince the public otherwise, it's not bigotry to remind people of God's claims on our lives and the biological reality. He offered free legal services through an organization that he started called Freedom Guard to any government officials, think of like justices of the peace or like those Kim Davis type officials who didn't want to compromise their faith by issuing marriage licenses, right? Like by having to do their job. He defended Louisiana's ban on marriage for same-sex couples. the Louisiana Marriage Protection Amendment in court when that was up. He sued the city of New Orleans as part of the Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF, when New Orleans tried to extend, I believe it was health coverage to same-sex partners back in like 2000.
I read about that. Yes, that's so fucking medieval to take people's health care. I mean, it's one thing to not let them get married, but you can't afford health insurance because you love a person. Oh God, it's so bad. It's such a bad, terrible thing to do to someone.
Yeah, I mean, there's an anti-bullying event for LGBTQ youth called the Day of Silence.
Yes, I'm quite familiar with it because it became a controversy in my community. It's been reprehensible. We had kids protesting, 7th and 8th grade kids wearing shirts that said something like pro-straight marriage, and then tugging on the knapsacks of other students trying to get them to talk because they had taken this kind of solidarity of silence that day. It became a huge controversy in my town for a few weeks. And then people have been trying to get rid of the National Day of Silence. Sorry to jump on you, but I'm just illustrating how it happened in my fucking town in Clarkstown, New York.
I mean, that's really useful to know because one of the groups that started those counter protests to the Day of Silence was the Alliance Defending Freedom with Johnson as the senior legal counsel. They created a counter event called the Day of Truth. And you have Johnson out there telling the media, in language that you already mentioned, it's another perspective on the homosexual lifestyle, which many people believe is morally wrong and physically dangerous. Right? Like, I mean, it's going after an anti-bullying event. It's bullying. That's what it is. And there's example after example, a 2005 op-ed, a 2004 op-ed, a 2003 op-ed, which came after the Lawrence versus Texas case. And that was the case that where the Supreme Court struck down the bans on sodomy. You want to do your joke again? No? Okay.
That so is hilarious that you gave me a safe space for it. And I just decided that was the best joke, was your offering. So go ahead.
So, I mean, you have Lawrence versus Texas. The Supreme Court strikes down these sodomy laws that criminalize sodomy. And he writes this op-ed talking about how it's a blow to the fundamental American values and a millennia of moral teaching, and saying that proscriptions against sodomy have deep roots in religion and politics and law. I mean, just time and time and time again, right up till last year when he introduces a federal version of a Don't Say Gay bill, the bill that we saw in Florida that would have prohibited any discussion of sexual orientation and gender identity and related subjects to any institution that receives federal funds. Right? Just time and time and time again, this guy, who is again now second in line for the presidency, is pushing this Christian, this narrow religious viewpoint about other people onto the entire country. That's Christian nationalism.
You mentioned that you'd tangled with him in the past.
Yeah, I've known who he is, not personally, but I mean, with ADF so many times, so many different ways. Basically, at Americans United for Separation of Church and State, we work to separate church and state, and we do a lot of work on abortion rights and LGBTQ rights and religion in the public schools, things like that. And ADF and First Liberty Institute, which are the two groups that Johnson has worked on, are often on the other side of these cases. So he was very, very familiar to us, especially when he got elected to Congress. And some of the work that he has done there, damage, I guess would be a better word for that. So we're very, very familiar with him, and not tangled with him personally in any of the court cases.
What else do you know about him or his family or his weird adopted son? I'm not saying the kid is weird. I'm saying it's a weird situation because he has a son who apparently is black, but like he doesn't appear in photos with him and his family. And I don't know. That's a whole screwy deal, is my assumption somehow. And so what else what else?
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. One of the cases that Americans United took in 2018 in Bossier Parish, Louisiana, which is where Johnson is from, where he represents, there was just this extensive violations of students' religious freedom. I mean, you had prayer being imposed on these kids, like all kinds of proselytizing, all kinds of different violations across the board. So Americans United sued over that. And Johnson who again, is from the area, was just vocal supporter of imposing Christianity on other people's children using the machinery of the state. The district in that case ultimately settled the case and acknowledged all of those violations. We won, but you still have him out there. He pushed a Bible curriculum in the public schools really early on in his career, in the early 2000s. He sponsored a bill. You saw his fondness for the Declaration of Independence and misreading that. Yeah. So he really wanted to get fourth, fifth, and sixth graders to recite passages from the Declaration of Independence that he thought was particularly important. He put a bill forward for that. He led prayer rally at Bossier Parish High School when we were dealing with that case. And then, I think the stuff that really is fascinating and terrifying, the school shootings and the moral decay. His idea that the reason we are seeing these school shootings is because we're teaching kids that they have evolved from primordial slime and that it's survival of the fittest.
What was the quote? He said something regarding that, like that? What?
Yeah. So here it is.
He tied school shootings to evolution. Is that what you said? That I'm trying to find the exact quote now.
Here it is. We've taught a couple generation now of Americans that there is no right and wrong, and that it's about survival of the fittest, and that you evolve from primordial slime. Why is that life of any sacred? Because there's nobody sacred to whom it's owed. And he also, in another one, he does, in that same sermon later on, he points out that it's no-fault divorce laws and radical feminism and legalizing abortion, and in a graphic that he actually showed that atheists are undermining religion and morality and what he would call the foundation of our nation. He says in another interview that when you tell a generation of people that life has no value, no meaning, that life is expendable, then you wind up with school shooters. Right. So, this to him is without religion, without his particular brand of religion, nobody knows how to act morally in any way, shape, or form. And then there's another.
And the reason why, I get just to underscore why that matters. If a person, whether it's climate or gun violence or even economic ideas, if those are their beliefs, they're entitled to them. But if they are in places of power, in courts and in Congress and in state houses and in governors' mansions, like the policy, they do nothing. It's the leading cause of death for children and adolescents is gun violence, including suicides. And he could do a lot to bring those numbers down as the Speaker of the House. Probably almost nobody more than him, because Democrats have been trying to do it for years now, and he will do nothing as a result of the beliefs that you just articulated. And I'm not sure how to comprehend that.
I genuinely don't know. Right? They have the power to save thousands of children's lives.
The only way I can comprehend it is that he truly believes that, but and if that's the case, then he's an insane person, because rational, pragmatic thinkers will always include the part about the gun.
That's the thing. Even if he does believe that, he still has it within his power to save thousands of children's lives by enacting some common sense gun reform and regulation, right? And is not doing that, despite all these protests.
By saying that all these, whatever his belief is, all these things that have happened to a degraded society and created a generation of lost devils. But at least we could prevent those people from getting guns. Yeah. Like, can we do anything to prevent those people that you're critical of from getting?
In fact, we could argue that if he truly believes that, and that we are this fallen society and that everybody's immoral, that's all the more reason they shouldn't have guns in the first place, right? Let's get them out of all of these immoral, godless heathens' hands, right? But no, they're not going to do that. We haven't even touched on his anti-abortion stuff. He is a devotee of David Barton, and that name may seem like slightly familiar to some folks. David Barton is the granddaddy of Christian nationalist disinformation in the United States of America. He is the person behind a group called Wall Builders. Wall Builders was one of the sponsors of Project Blitz. This is the guy where, if you've heard the myths surrounding the idea that America was founded as a Christian nation, which I rip apart in my first book, The Founding Myth, right? Like, most of that disinformation traces back to David Barton. And we have Johnson on record saying of David Barton, I was introduced to David and his ministry a quarter century ago, and it has had such a profound influence on me and my work and my life and everything I do. And that's clear. I mean, you can see that.
Yeah, if people don't know David Barton, he's a really important player in the Christian nationalist movement. You already said it, but more importantly, in the propaganda of it all, which has been coming in different times. You write about, and I think is in your first book, in the 50s, which is when In God We Trust got put on the money and other things happened. And what I think it's super important to talk about the war, and you've written a lot about this, of ideas that takes place in schools in our country. And that's clearly, it's courts and schools that they put a lot of their focus on, obviously, because that's where a lot of power lies. Makes sense for any movement to put an investment in that. And they've educated a lot of American students through a whole bunch of different, I guess, developments over the years to think things that aren't true about the origin of the founding of our country, and how a lot of this stuff just took place like in the 50s and other times in our lifetimes, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really fascinating aspect of
like the re-education of people can take place at every 10 years, I suppose.
Well, I mean, but Christian nationalism is an entire identity that is built around disinformation. Right. Their claim to be the true heirs of the American experiment depends on certain lies and myths. And there are things that people have had that you just repeated, like we are one nation under God and in God we trust. And the Declaration of Independence references the Christian God 4 different times. And the founding fathers were all evangelical Christians. And the founding fathers prayed at the Constitutional Convention. And George Washington knelt in the snow at Valley Forge and prayed. And that our laws are based on the 10 Commandments. Right. None of that's true. And all of those lies are debunked in the founding myth. But without the historical cover that those lies give, their policy justifications begin to crumble. Without their common well of myths and lies, their identity begins to wither and fade. And with it, their power, their claims of legitimacy, their unity. So, one of the things that was striking to me about when I was writing the founding myth is that their entire political and ideological reality is actually incredibly weak and vulnerable because it's based on these historical distortions and lies. But the problem that we face, our side faces, is that we need more than facts to fight back. We need better arguments, and we need more visceral and even emotional arguments. And that was really what I was trying to do in the founding myth.
And you do it very effectively there and here and everywhere that you go. But we need better arguments and better ways to communicate. I wonder how that is most effective. What are examples that you find that are effective? Because one might also argue the most important thing is we need more power. We need to win governments back, state governments back, local governments, as I'm doing between every interview. I'm making phone calls now in the home stretch here for our local candidates. We need judges that aren't lunatics who believe in science. And so, but when it comes to messaging and trying to convince people, what works?
I mean, I do think we need the facts. We need better facts in a way.
Sure.
But we are in we're in an age of alternative facts, right? So we need those better arguments, but those arguments, they have to be more than just cerebral, right? Because they have to strike at the very core of their attempt to rewrite our identity by trying to rewrite our history, right? They are trying to rewrite the secular DNA of the United States of America.
Yes.
And so that's what we have to push back on it. And this is one of the things, again, I try to do this throughout the founding myth. Not only is it fair to say that Christian nationalism is un-American, and that's the subtitle of the founding myth. It's the founding myth, why Christian nationalism is un-American. I think we have to do that. I think that's part of what we're trying to do here. And I recognize that for a lot of your listeners, the word un-American probably makes them squeamish. There's a value judgment built into that phrase. But we are in a fight for our values right now. America is in a fight for its values. Christian nationalism is warping and torturing those values. It's dragging this country down a dark hole. And if we hesitate to describe this identity with apt phrases because they may be unpleasant, we are ceding the American identity to an imposter. And one more thought on that. If calling Christian nationalism un-American makes you uncomfortable, let me say two final things. One, remember that patriotism has no religion. Patriotism has no religion. And second, examine that discomfort, like really put a lens on it and ask yourself, am I uncomfortable with this un-American label because Christian nationalism is already so close to completing its mission, right? Have they done such a good job of corrupting patriotism and conflating it with nationalism and MAGA hats? Have they done such a good job of corrupting what it should mean to be an American that I don't want to consider myself part of that? Because I don't think the historically accurate claim that secularism is the true legacy of the American experiment is the problem. I'm betting it's more the former. So just encourage people to, if they have discomfort with that label, to really kind of examine it and then hopefully employ it.
It's interesting. Oh, it's all so fascinating. I have a lot of reactions to what you're saying. You're always making me think about these things. But I mean, I guess the thing that I thought growing up, and we touched on this in our first conversation, you've written and talked about this, but was most American or uniquely American, or something I liked about America, at least the narrative I bought into, was that in America, we had the freedom of and from religion. You could choose a religion, anyone you wanted, or none at all. And that's cool. We can all try to get along given that, because that's a somewhat unique thing, because people come here from all over with a whole bunch of religions. And a lot of us aren't religious, and that's cool. And we can all hang out and party in our own ways and get along. And that, to me, was something that I loved about what I thought America was. But Christian nationalists want to make us all them and all wear a uniform and maybe grow a beard and act a certain way and have all kinds of rules. I mean, I joke about the beard thing, but there's all kinds of things that they want to make us do or not do. It's not American to me, not what I thought America was.
No, you could not be more right. And now like you're making my heart sing. Like our Constitution guarantees a secular government, a secular state. And that is one of the ways that we protect religious freedom, because there is no freedom of religion without a government that is free from religion. And this is woven into the fabric of our Constitution, right? Our Constitution was the first to declare that power comes from people, not gods, right? The three words at the beginning, we the people, those are poetic, but there's so much more. They are a declaration of power and where that power comes from. Our Constitution was the first governing document not to mention a god or deity. It's godless by choice, not by accident. And some people in the founding generation objected to that choice. Our Constitution was the first to ban religious tests for public office in Article 6. That was the only mention of religion in the original unamended document. And it bans those tests with some of the most clear and emphatic language in a document that is often deliberately vague. It says, no religious test shall ever be required to any qualification or office or public trust, right? No, shall, ever, any. I mean, the wall of separation between church and state is an American original. It is an American invention. The idea was floating around in the Enlightenment, but it was first implemented in the American experiment. Until then, no other nation in the history of the world had sought to protect the ability of its citizens to think freely. And we should be proud of that. And we shouldn't let people undermine it with myths about a Christian founding. Okay, sorry, get off my soapbox now.
No, I like that. That's you're a human highlight reel of amazing rhetoric around history and religion and the intersection here in America and the debunking of it all. That's your work is dedicated to that and so good. Let me just ask you one final question simply about I know your friend Robbie Jones and his organization PRRI do all this great polling and everything, and you know the way to look at kind of the politics of it all or the national trends on religion in America, I think it can be really misleading because of the House and the Senate and the way that the Electoral College works. It makes people think something about America that might not be so accurate in terms of what we believe about all this stuff that you're an expert on talking about. And it's misleading because you see a Trump get elected, and that's probably less about religion and more about autocracy and, having a daddy and authoritarianism and cruelty and all that. I'm sure you can tie religion into it, that brand of it, certainly. But then you see Mike Johnson becoming Speaker of the House. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're in these gerrymandered districts where there's a lot of very religious, right-wing, evangelical Christian nationalists, and they get elected and they sound nuts because they are nuts. They don't represent the vast majority of Americans. And then we can talk about why the Senate is the way it is, and we can talk about different states and so on. But just talk to me a little bit about the data and the trends about what Americans mostly believe when it comes to the idea of our founding and Christian nationalists and what they believe, because we're really mostly not on board with these folks.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. Only about a quarter of the country are what we might call like hardcore Christian nationalists. There's probably another 20% to a quarter that are what would be labeled as like sympathizers. Like they're maybe like they're a little lukewarm on some of those ideas. And then the rest of the country is opposed to it. And I mean, Christian nationalists, they're not just wrong about what America is and how it was founded. Their beliefs and ideas, they run counter to the ideals on which this nation was founded. Again, they are un-American, but they're also really unpopular, and their ideas are really unpopular, right? Like, they oppose marriage equality. 71% of Americans support it. They want to outlaw abortion. 85% of Americans think it should be legal. They want a nation of Christians like them, and 73% of Americans are more welcoming of religious pluralism. I'm sure they'd also like to ban contraception too, but something like 91% of Americans are in favor. And those numbers terrify them. They are scared about that. They're scared, and their conservative white Christian America's status as the dominant group in our society is threatened. It's actually gone, and it has been for some time. They're losing the culture wars, which is a phrase I kind of hate because I think it just masks attacks on human rights. But they are losing the privilege and the power and the deference which they believe they are due. And when that happens to a dominant group or a caste in a society, when they feel threatened, they react or overreact in ways to retain that status. And that's why you're seeing them turn to Christian nationalism, to voter suppression, to the violent insurrection that we saw on January 6th. They are raging against the dying of their privilege. And that's what we're fighting back against at Americans United every single day.
You're doing a great job at it. Do you know the data or on the beliefs of Christian nationalists and gun rights or anti-gun laws? I mean, don't they overwhelm?
Not guns off the top of my head, but one thing that's really striking about Christian nationalism and the adherence of it is that they are far more likely, as they are raging against the dying of their privilege, to agree that political violence is acceptable. So PRRI, which is Robbie Jones' outfit, they asked people to agree with a statement that was something like, America's gotten so far off track that true patriots have to resort to violence to save the country. It was something like that. Don't quote me exactly. And overwhelmingly, Americans disagree with that. Like 4 out of 5 Americans disagree. But for Christian nationalists, like that number skyrockets. Like 40% of them agree with that statement.
Oh, yeah. I do remember, I feel like seeing that data point. One of their polls came out, and then I remember like deleting it from my mind because I didn't want to believe it.
Yeah, it's a scary one. But I mean, that is what explains January 6th, right? I mean, and then Christian nationalism provided the permission structure for the attack that day, and also the permission structure for the violence, and that's what Robbie's study showed.
Yeah, and you did a lot of work around that. We talked a little bit about it in our first conversation around the influence of Christian nationalism on that day with those people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was very, very clear. There's a great report that we put together, myself and Amanda Tyler, with some of the other experts out there like Catherine Stewart, Jamar Tisby, Anthea Butler, Sam Perry, Andrew Whitehead, if people are interested. It's January 6th or Christian Nationalism and the January 6th Insurrection. It's available online for free.
I'll go check that out as a way to prepare because I reached out to Amanda Tyler in her group, and I'm going to talk to her on Monday. So,
oh, great. Yeah.
Can you put in a good word for me, please?
Yes, I can definitely do that.
He's never been on, and, people that haven't been on before, sometimes they're wondering what they're walking into. Please don't say anything. I promise I won't make any ass play jokes to Amanda.
So. I will text her a warning right now. Yeah,
Awesome talking to you, Andrew. I really appreciate you coming back with me. Friend. Always really good.
Absolutely. I'm happy to come do it anytime. Just let me know. I love talking about this stuff. I love fighting it even more. So
yes. Yeah, you're real good at it and a great leader. Thanks, man.
I appreciate that.
All right, there he goes. Andrew Seidel. Get his books, support him, follow him, all that information to do it on in the show notes for today and every show. And support me and this show. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Cannot do it without you. Thank you so much to everybody who continues to support me, my show, the work. So great to hook up with Gareth Sever. I forgot to mention that earlier. Over the weekend, we finally met. That was very, very cool. Great, great guy. And I can't wait to meet all of you at some point. Thank you so much for today, and I look forward to talking to you tomorrow. John Carroll does the music for this show. He brings us in, and he brings us out. Take it away, Johnny.
Trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it than now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand up.